Heyo, it's OmniDog. We are live and on the air. Welcome, OmniDogs and OmniKittens. Thank you for tuning in. With me today is the writer of Grief, Frank Gogol. Frank, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, I'm completely jealous, not of the fact that you wrote a comic book, but the fact that you live on the West Coast is killing me because I grew up on the West Coast and I miss it every day. So I consider you extremely lucky.
And we were just talking before we came on about how I'm the complete opposite from the East Coast and extremely jealous of you that you get to live on the East Coast right now.
Well, I'm gonna visit Carmel in July, and I'll get my fix there. That's where I grew up, and I guess you can come out and visit here. But I would gladly swap places with you. But I'm glad you're enjoying success in San Francisco. Let's talk a little bit about Grief. I know there are a lot of people that probably wonder, and I will get to that. I wonder about publishing your own comic. You've made a beautiful book here. You've got different artists illustrating each story. It's a very well written, in my opinion, anthology. I really enjoyed this book. I've read it 3 or 4 times, and I love the design of it. It's really designed really well. I mean, this front cover is just something amazing, I think. Give me an idea of what motivated you to sort of get started writing with this particular theme.
So I grew up on a healthy diet of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and that might be really evident in a couple of the stories. Highs and lows, particularly. I was inspired a little bit by the season finale of season 2 of Buffy, where there's sort of a win-lose scenario in the story. I grew up on Buffy. I grew up on Stan Lee, Spider-Man. Real people with real problems, going through real things. But it sort of happened by accident. Honestly, I took a comics writing class at the the beginning of 2016, so a little over 2 years ago, and I just wrote what I knew. So the last story in the collection, Embrace, is a story about a father and his autistic son, and sort of just a day in their life together, and that is from my life. That's from my experience with my autistic cousin and my aunt, his mother. Sort of just a fictionalized version of what they go through. And I always knew I wanted to write sci-fi and horror and crime and all the, classic comic book genres, but I wanted to start with simple human stories first to make sure that when I was writing my big sci-fi epic someday, I still had, it as a character-driven thing where it was about real people going through real things, because I think that's what people connect with in stories. Explosions and monsters and space battles are really cool, but if you aren't connected to it, you don't feel anything because of it. So that was really important to me. I came to the theme of grief sort of by accident. I was writing short stories just to sort of build up my resume and so I could have a portfolio to take to editors to see if I can get freelance work. And I laid them out one day, and I had about 6 or 7 of them. And I was looking them over, trying to figure out what I wanted to write next. And I was like, oh, these all sort of follow this thematic link of people going through the grieving process. And for those of you who aren't aware, with the Kubler-Ross model, there are 5 stages of the grieving process. And I sort of identified 5 of them and a couple that sort of crossed over between them. And I was like, all right. So I went and I wrote a few more stories and filled it out so that I had 2 stories for each stage of the grieving process. And then I mixed them up and threw a cover on them.
Right. I was surprised. Well, first of all, the first story I think impacted me the most. You can't save everybody. It affected me the most because it wasn't what I was expecting at all. I can show a little bit. I can't show too much because I don't want to give anything away. But this one really surprised me and kind of made me say, whoa, this book's going to be special if all the other stories are as good as this one, because I that was a really smart first placement of a story, because it really grabbed me, and I loved it. What stage do you feel the grieving process this one was?
So that one is called Cassandra, but that's denial. It's loosely denial. So part of
okay.
part of what happens when you read this is you realize that it's not strictly a book about the grieving process, every step of the way. You can grieve little things, the loss of a relationship, a job. It's not always death. And in that story, it's about, what it means to be a good person versus a person who gets things done, and, coming to terms with what that might mean as a police officer. So that's a different kind of emotional grieving. So the grief is a loose term for some of the stories. They're all definitely about some kind of loss or dealing with loss in that way. But I think a big misconception when people hear me give the pitch at conventions or just when I'm talking about it is that it's going to be about death or dealing with death, and it is in a lot of cases. But with that story in particular, it's not. Yeah.
Right, and I noticed the same with the one with the autistic child. I mean, there's a lot of stories in here that don't have to deal with death, but I noticed the one that didn't have to deal with death but was still extremely effective was the one that. Oh, I'm sorry. You have the names at the end. The names are at the end of the Cassandra. So the autistic child one is Embrace. I felt that it was pretty emotionally powerful. I think that's one thing that comes through in your stories, is that they are all very emotionally powerful and impact the reader. So I think you've considering now this is your first book, right?
Yeah.
Considering this is your first book, I have to say, I'm not trying to be gatekeepery here. I've read comics for 53 years, and so I'm not the gatekeeper of all that's been written. But I have to say, for your first effort, this is remarkable that every single story has an emotional punch to it that I would think somebody with much more experience would have.
It's like I said a little while ago, it was really important to me to learn how to tell human stories first, things that affect people, because that's when I no spoilers, but when I read Why the Last Man, I really liked it. When I got to the last issue, I loved it. And there's a reason for that, and anyone who's read Why the Last Man understands that. Same with another Brian K. Vaughan, Pride of Baghdad. It's a good story, but when you get to the end, it's a great story, and there's a reason for it, and it has to do with how you feel about what's happening. So if people don't feel attached to the story, it's just a cool story or it's a bad story. But if they're invested emotionally and they want to, care about the characters and what happens to them, I think that has a much bigger impact. And I also think it's just something that's missing from comics in general. There's a reason that big two comics like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and X-Men aren't as good as they maybe once were, and it's because I think people aren't as invested anymore, because these are action books and not emotional stories. I can name you a couple of Spider-Man stories off the top of my head that people always name. There's the one about the little kid who's dying who collects Spider-Man comics. That one's got an emotional stake, and that's the reason people remember it. I don't know that I can name you 10 Dan Slott stories, even though I liked Slott's run, because Slott didn't write a lot of emotional stories.
Okay, that's a good point. The emotional hook that makes you, that's always important in any medium, really. Characters that you care about and well written, that's the way you get Same with movies or TV show. You want characters that you can care about, and it's particularly hard to do in short stories, I think. Excuse me, I did. We sort of met on the Omnibus Collectors Comic Swap and Community Facebook page, and I did a review where I said short stories are hard to write in comic book form, and I cited Action Comics 1000, and I said, this is proof that they're hard to write. But in the same review, I gave this hard marks because in 4 or 5 pages, it can be extremely difficult to write a character that you can sort of not sink your teeth into, but get that emotional hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I am part of the Comics Experience writing school, like I mentioned earlier, and we have an online workshop where people come and they post stuff, and you give feedback and you talk. And one of my biggest feedbacks from most people who I could give feedback to is that this is a cool story. What's the emotional hook? Why should I invest? And that's, that is my point of view. There are other people who make a living not doing anything of the sort. Michael Bay has made a career out of making movies about people we care about, and that is success in some form. It's just not what I am looking for in stories. And I think that people don't have to go to the lengths that I do to make you care about the characters. I wish more would. I think they'd write better stories, but I think that it's an essential part of it. They tell you in most storytelling classes that story begins with character, and I believe that 100%.
Yeah, well, that's obvious in these stories. Another one that kept me guessing was different, and I thought this was well done, and it brought up the question to me of how you managed to get throughout the book. I think that there's some really quality art throughout the book. How did you manage to land all these different artists that are so good? I mean, these look like polished artists that could easily get a gig doing anything, and yet they took a chance on your first time book. Was it through connections, or how did you end up meeting them?
Well, first of all, they're all suckers, and that's why they worked with me. No, I'm kidding. They're all extremely talented people who have just not broken in yet. I can tell you at least 2 of the people listed on the front of the book are working on books at Action Lab and Image now, in one capacity or another. So I sort of caught them on the ground floor, and I've moved up a little bit. They're moving up a little bit. At least we're all, I like to think of comics in terms of like high school classes. You've got the old school class of Brian Bendis and Jonathan Hickman and Rick Remender and Matt Fraction, and those guys who came up through Marvel and are sort of doing Image and doing their own thing now for the most part. And then you've got the next class of guys like Matt Rosenberg and Brian K. Lindsay, who did the quote for the front of my book. These guys they're sort of filling in that vacated spot, and if I'm lucky and I keep doing as well as I hope I will be, maybe I'll be in that next class. But in terms of how I met these people, some of them are members of the Comics Experience Forum. Some of them were introductions. Some of them it was just good old cold emails, hunting them down on DeviantArt or a Facebook group, saying, "Hey, I like your stuff. What's your page rate? Would you be interested in doing a story?" And a lot of them said yes. I got a couple no's. I got a couple I'm too busy's. Some of them it was a yes, but with a caveat that we would do this slowly, and more better paying gigs would get priority if they came along. And it was a little bit of give and take, but I think for the most part, I'm friends with all these people now. I have really good working relationships with them. I'm writing longer pieces for a few of them now. I wish that I could work with a couple of them now, but they've sort of graduated beyond my page rate. But we'll see if I can keep up with them and see if we can mend that in the future. But yeah, so you find them where you can is the honest answer.
And you really do develop a relationship with the writer and artist, they really do develop a relationship. I can think of like we always see Snyder and Capullo together at cons, and they seem to be linked, you know, forever. You do develop kind of a, not necessarily a symbiotic relationship, but you do. There's definitely a connection you guys make.
Oh yeah, absolutely. My biggest fear when I started writing was that I would write these scripts and I'd see it one way in my head, and I'd have sort of one effect that I was hoping to achieve on a page, and that the writer, or I'm sorry, the artist would not sort of get my vision or get what I was hoping to achieve. And never have I ever been let down. And most times, like, the artist delivered something that's exceeded my expectations. There was one particularly tricky panel in Embrace. I think it's the third page or the fourth page, where the dad's trying to put the Superman toy back together. And I think I described it as glue tendrils. And Nenad, who did the art for that, Vidikanen, he's from Serbia, and English is not his first language, though he does speak very good English. I was just concerned that my description was not strong enough, but you know, you just gotta have faith. And yeah,
is this the one you're talking about?
The last panel, which, you know, looking at it, like, that's exactly what it looked like in my head. But he just, you know, I was worried, and I said he'll get it, and he delivered. So it's very much a trust thing. And you'll notice that was the first story I worked on. Of the 10 stories in there, Nenad drew 6 of them. So like, it obviously worked out. I'm hoping that I can bring him onto a project that I'm doing now, that's in the writing stage, and it'll be my first miniseries. And yeah, I sort of wrote it with him in mind.
Okay. And another thing that doesn't get talked about enough, at least I don't think so, is the coloring. The colorist, in a lot of these stories, I found the colors to be really perfect for each story. What kind of relationship did you leave it up to the artist, or what kind of relationship do you have with your colorist, or did the artist do their own coloring too?
So one of two things happened with the stories in this book. Sometimes, and I think it was only Nenad and maybe Beth, who did the second to last story, The World, did their own colors a couple times. Beth did her own colors, and Nenad did colors on, I want to say, Cassandra and Gravity. And then everything else was done by either Luca, whose last name escapes me, Bulgaroni, and Esther Pimentel did the colors for Embrace. Colors are my favorite part of a comic. I don't know how often comic fans pay very close attention to the difference between, you know, the sketches and then the line art, and then the inked pages and the color pages and the lettered pages. But there's a lot of steps. And for me, line art is always very impressive. Like, I cannot draw. I've done a few comics myself, and I've done them in Photoshop, but I have very little drawing talent. So I'm always impressed. But at the end of the day, they always look like coloring book pages to me in a weird way. Some of the artists I've worked with since this book have done some of their own shading, and it's been a little more sculpted looking and a little less flat. But for the most part, line work generally looks like coloring book pages, and it doesn't come alive for me until the colors hit it. So I was very particular about the colorists I worked with. Luca did most of the colors in the book. I want to say he did 5 of the stories. He did at least 4 of them. The one you just had open, Prayer, is probably my favorite colors in there. It's just he gets lighting, and that's a huge part of it. He also gets drama, which is sort of something you can't put into quantitative terms. It's just sort of a skill. But yeah, he nailed that story, and that was a weird story. I had it was like 2 weeks before Christmas, maybe even close, maybe 10 days, and I was like, you know what? I'd really like to write a Christmas story. Christmas stories are some of my favorite stories. A Christmas Carol and A Christmas Story and A Muppet Christmas Carol. Like, these are all stories that I return to time and time again. I love Christmas. I was like, yeah, I want to write a story set at Christmas. Maybe I'm trying to do my best Shane Black impersonation. So I wrote this script in about an hour, and it was probably the only time in my short career that I've nailed a script on the first go, like no revisions, just a couple of like grammatical things. And then about 15 minutes after I finished it, I reached out to Nana and said, hey, I've got a 5-page Christmas story I'd love to include with my newsletter, the one that goes out either right before or right after Christmas, and that was a couple days away. I was like, do you think you could knock out these pages? So I purposely wrote them not to be super complicated. It's a lot of talking heads. It's a straight up drama story, but one with a lot of heart and a little what's the word I'm looking for? A little hope to it. So he like a badass. Just I think I had all 5 pages drawn, penciled, inked, and in my inbox like the next day or the day after, like very quickly. And then Luca knocked out the colors really quickly too, and he just perfectly captured that like Christmas time, East Coast cold weather palette. Like I don't even know how to explain it, but the story came together. Sean Reinhart did the letters in about a day, which letters are pretty quick usually, but the whole thing came together in about 5 days, which was its own little Christmas miracle. And I did the same thing again this past year with a different artist, but it's sort of become a tradition. But yeah, that's doing that story on that tight deadline, which was totally artificial. I didn't have to do it, but that's what really, really made me want to work with Luca over and over and over and over again. I think he'd colored one story before that for me, which was also very good. But just most people don't know much about colors. He's still in school in Italy. He's in art school. I think he's 21, and he's doing that Marvel level colors. So I'm not going to be able to afford to work with him for much longer either.
Well, you were lucky to get these artists while you can, but I don't know about that. I think your level of talent is going to enable you to afford whoever you want pretty soon. I think I love these stories. I'd be interested in what you've got in the hopper now. Do you have more projects that you're working on now? I assume a writer is constantly writing, just like an artist needs to draw.
Sure, yeah. So I moved to San Francisco about 6 months ago, and I have not yet landed a new full-time job, so I've had plenty of time to write. And I figure, since I have this free time, I might as well put it to good use. So I've been really churning out as much stuff as I can. I spent the first 3 months of the year sort of planning stories. There's a lot of development time that I spend putting stories together. And I think that is part of why the emotional arcs and punches sort of come through, because I spend a lot of time really cultivating those. But once March hit, I started writing. And not that long ago, I challenged myself to write my first miniseries. It's a 3-issue miniseries called Dead End Kids. And I challenged myself to write it in 12 days. And it's a 3-issue, 20 pages per issue, so it was 60 pages. I gave myself, 5-day minimum or 5-page minimum per day. And I know that I can knock out 5 good pages pretty quickly. Like I said, that Christmas story, I did that in a sitting. And that was, very quick, but I could definitely do 5 pages in a couple hours. What ended up happening was I finished the whole draft in about 7 days or 8 days. I think it was 7 days. And when I was reading it over, I was like, oh, this isn't actually that bad. So that's in the pipeline. I'm hoping I've got 2 artists in mind for it. So I'm working on getting some feedback so I can do a second draft, but I think it's pretty much there. Everyone who's read it has said, goddamn. I don't know. Sorry if I had to bleep that out, but
oh no, it's okay. We can say anything we want
on the internet. But yeah, no, the reaction's been really good to that story, so I'm pretty hopeful. I'm thinking that it's going to be one more draft, and then I could probably move to the art phase. I'm also working on a couple things that are in production right now. I've got a story called Suburbia Robotica, which is sort of a Pinocchio meets Westworld kind of story. It's the only way to describe it.
It's a what now?
Pinocchio meets Westworld.
Pinocchio meets Westworld. Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a modern retelling of Pinocchio with a robot, and sort of a return to that darker side of fairy tales that Disney sort of has trained us to forget. It's dark, and the art is a little cartoony and a little Disney-esque to sort of lull people into a false sense of security before they hit the end of the story. It's a lot of fun. I'm really proud of it. I've got another one-shot that's going to be part of a series of one-shots called The Used, and that is a sort of my take on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's about a recovering drug addict named Kayla who has to end up taking on essentially the Lost Boys, a drug-dealing pack of vampires, and that's a really big emotional story. That's another one. I wrote that in about 2 days. And my buddy Chris from back in New Jersey, who I shared a comic shop with, whose art is just incredible, is he's developing that right now. We're probably going to start official production on it in about a week or two. So with any luck, these stories will be out in the next year. I'm pitching them both to my publisher, SourcePoint Press, who carries Grief, and I like my odds of seeing them in print there. Definitely The Used. That's right up their alley. It's horror. It's strong female-led stories, which I know they're probably trying to do a little more of to keep up with the times. And then outside of that, I've got one other project in production. It's called After the Storm. And this is more of a for me in the vein of Grief kind of book. It's the straight-up drama, one shot, and it takes a look at sort of what happens in the wake of a big storm like Hurricane Sandy or last year's Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Maria. The news coverage for these things tends to go one way and one way only. You cover up to the storm, you cover the storm, and then for about a day after the storm, you see wreckage on the news, and then it's on to whatever the next story is. You don't really follow up with what happens in the aftermath of these kinds of things. And in 2012, my family and I and all my friends who lived on the Jersey Shore, we lived through that. I lost my apartment, my parents lost their house, and it was very much a community thing. People coming together, helping. I remember going to my best friend's house and ripping up carpet in their house so they could get new carpet put in after their house got lifted up, raised rather. And it was just, you don't. The news is driven by tragedy. It's people only want to see the horrible stuff. They don't want to see the positive stuff. That's why the news is the way it is. But I wanted to tell a very positive story about finding community and just a very sort of semi-autobiographical look at what happens next. Where do you get food when you can't go to your kitchen to cook? What do you do when you feel lost? And like I said, this is a for me one. This one isn't going to line my pockets. It'll probably be a Kickstarter. But it's a story I really wanted to tell, especially after the hurricanes last year. And this is becoming a more regular thing. I just thought it was an important story to tell.
Speaking of Kickstarter, take us through your experience with Kickstarter and then your experience. You've been going to a lot of cons to, I think, with your publisher or by yourself or both?
With SourcePoint so far. I did a free comic book day on my own in my local shop. That was sort of my first and only solo selling experience. The other 3 cons I've been to and the other 4 or 5 I have for the rest of the year will all be with SourcePoint. So Kickstarter, just thinking about it makes me tired. It's not a drag, that's the wrong word for it, but it is a lot of work. To sort of gear myself up for the Kickstarter, I listened to the Comics Launch podcast that Tyler James from Comics Tribe and Comics Launch does. And it's just, it's like 20 and 30-minute episodes. Maybe they're even shorter than that. And each one he gives you sort of, the in and out of one aspect of Kickstarter, and then sort of, he calls them comics launchers. They're little to-dos to practice that particular skill that you need for the Kickstarter. So what I would do is I would go take like a 1 hour, hour and a half walk once a day, and I'd listen to a few episodes, and then when I get home, I'd do the homework. And I built up a campaign. I've got a I've got a graphic design background, so I made the page look nice. And you mentioned the design of the book. I did the design for the book. The cover was me. The art was Danny Martin's, but the design, the logo, the interior pages, that was all me. And I took those skills and I made sure that the video and the page itself and just everything, neat presentation, really clean. I am a huge fan of clean presentations. Books like East of West and Black Science always stand out to me on the shelf as, pick-me-up books versus the average Marvel action shot of Spider-Man fighting a bad guy. Yeah, so it was Kickstarter. Like I said, it's exhausting. It's 30 days. It's constant. I launched my Kickstarter at like 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern time too, so that way it would end around that time, and I'd be able to get up on the last day and do a little bit more pushing in the last couple hours instead of ending in the middle of the night. A lot of people start at midnight for some reason. I don't know why. But it was a really good experience. Obviously, it eventually led to me getting the book published with a publisher. But people really liked the idea of what the book was about. This book about showing people struggling and about instilling hope in the face of struggle. And sort of all bets were kind of off with it too. I did it as an exclusively digital Kickstarter, so your options were a PDF of the book for $1, and then some upsells like a $5 script and process document that came with it. And that was a little risky. There were some higher tiers where you could get some physical stuff like a printed version of the script with handwritten annotations, which never do those. They take forever. My hand is still healing, but we ended up blowing the goal out of the water. It was like $1,500, and we ended up on just shy of 4,000. And that's thanks to friends and family, of course. Those are the people who help you through your first Kickstarter when you're building any kind of a fan base. But also just a couple of random strangers who really dug the book. I reached out to a lot of them. Most of them weren't comic fans. They just really liked what I was trying to do and wanted to sort of support the arts, I guess. So yeah, that's Kickstarter. It's a great, powerful tool. And it's definitely part of the future of publishing comics, but it is a lot of work.
And have you had a good experience at cons with your work?
Oh yeah, definitely. So real quick, let me talk a little bit about how my book got picked up by SourcePoint Press. I mentioned a few times so far that I'm part of Comics Experience, which if you have any interest in writing or drawing or creating comics in any facet, definitely check them out. Because what they have is a partnership with SourcePoint Press, where it's basically, so when you pitch a publisher a book, you usually go in cold, especially in the beginning of your career. You don't know anybody, they don't know you. If it's your first book, they've never seen anything you've written, you probably have no fan base, and it's daunting. It's definitely hard to break in. I mean, most people talk about breaking into comics like it's this impossible thing, and that's because in a lot of ways it can be. There are a lot of doors you have to kick down. Comics Experience has a joint agreement publishing program with SourcePoint Press that sort of alleviates a lot of that process and opens up some of those doors. So I was a member of Comics Experience, and they did their first wave of submissions for SourcePoint Press. They have a joint publishing line that I think is just called Comics Experience SourcePoint Press. And I was part of that because I was part of Comics Experience, which opened up that first door. I was in for consideration instead of possibly just going right into the garbage. And Grief was chosen. So that came out at the beginning of April this year, and I've been traveling around. I've been to all 4 cardinal directions of the U.S. I've been to Chicago, San Francisco, Houston, and Pennsylvania, New Jersey in the last 2.5 months. And it's been a really good experience. And I'm glad I landed at SourcePoint because they are the kind of people who they invest in creators. So one of the first things they did was they sent me a video link for a YouTube video to a panel that Casey, what's her last name? She goes by Casey Daniel, but it's not really her full name. But she's one of the greatest movers and shakers at Source Point Press. She could sell sand to a man in the desert. She's that good. But she did the panel on, you know, how to make a sale, among other things that new comics creators should know. And I watched that video, and I watched it like 10 times, and I took a lot of notes. And then I got to Chicago, and I knew what I needed to be doing to get somebody to pull over and talk to me at the con and pitch them my book and get them to buy it. But it really, there's a huge difference between thinking you know what to do and being able to do it. And right away, I was like, oh, shit. It was hard. But Casey was there, and Travis McIntyre, who's the editor-in-chief at Source Point Press, was there. And they just kept walking me through it and encouraging me. And we had pretty conservative estimates about what the book would sell at C2E2. We said if we did 20 copies over the course of the weekend, that would be a win. We ended up doing 20 in the first day and 60 over the course of the whole weekend.
Oh. You're going to have to excuse me for 1 second. My wife got in a car accident.
Okay.
So 1 second, my wife just got in a car accident. So let me just pause for a second, and I'll be right back. Okay, well, she's okay. So everything's okay.
Good. I'm very glad to hear it.
Sorry about that. She had texted me ahead of time that she had gotten in a car accident and just wondered she was okay and just wondered about the insurance. And I told her where the insurance papers were in the car, and police came and everything's okay. So I have a feeling it was a minor accident, but she was calling me, and so I was wanting to make sure she wasn't on her way to the hospital or something. So everything's okay. I apologize. You were saying you ended up selling 60 books in Chicago and blew the estimates out of the water?
Yeah, and a huge majority of the reason that was possible is because I had people like Casey and Travis and the rest of the SourcePoint staff and the other creators with SourcePoint just there backing me up, helping me refine the pitch. You know, watching them work is an education in itself. And since then, we did good numbers in Philly. I did good numbers on Free Comic Book Day in San Francisco. I on my own in just a few hours, I sold about 25 copies. And then this past weekend, or the weekend before, or no, it was last weekend in Houston. We sold out. All of them have been sellouts, which is sort of what has been the really inspiring part. So I will continue doing shows with them for the rest of the year. I'll be at Amazing Las Vegas Comic-Con at the end of this month. I will be at New Jersey's Garden State Comic Fest the following weekend. So I'll be able to take a week and go back home for a few days in between those, which is nice. I'll do Rose City Comic-Con in Portland, Baltimore Comic-Con.
Oh, good. I'll see you at Baltimore. I'm going to be going there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out my travel plans for all that, but that's one of my favorite shows of the year. I think it's a really good creator-friendly show. They get some really nice talents and just a nice show. It's nice to do these East Coast shows. And then I'll be at New York Comic-Con all 4 days, which is super surprising. SourcePoint called me up from the minors to do one of the big shows. And that's just, it's a testament to their faith in me and how much I've been able to take in what they've been laying down for me to learn. And it's really exciting because, it's New York Comic-Con. It's like the second biggest show in the world. Yeah,
that is a huge deal that you're going to be in New York. Going through the writing process, going through selling, I imagine it's probably a combination of oh, do these guys really want to buy my book? And then, whoa, these guys want to buy my book. And I imagine you go through all kinds of emotions when, through the writing process and through the selling of it. Are there any, did you end up learning anything introspectively about yourself through the writing of this book or the selling of this book? Because you pour your heart and soul into a book like this and it gets accepted. So I'm just wondering, did you discover something, any things about yourself that you didn't know before?
Yeah, 100%, lots of things. And I could talk your ear off for hours and hours about this. But a couple of things that really stand out to me. One, not to sound like braggadocious or anything like this, but I am pretty good at this. And I think that's the big thing that most writers worry about. Like, is my stuff any good? And for a long time, I didn't believe it. Like, I knew my stories were kind of clever, but I always thought I was, I'm still a novice in some sense. I've been doing this for 2 years and I have one book published. So I've a modicum of success, but I'm not, I'm not Robert Kirkman. But I've heard enough people tell me that my stories are good and that grief is good. Like, probably once a week at least, I get a Facebook message or an Instagram message, or even a forwarded text message from somebody whose friend who bought the book, saying how much they loved it. And at some point, I had to say, all right, I can't be humble for humble's sake. People are liking this. It's good, and be proud of myself, and I think that's really hard because you don't want to be a douchebag. You don't want to you don't want to come off as the guy who's super full of himself, but you also don't. No one should sell themselves short. If you're good at something, know that you're good at it and do it, especially if it's art, right? You want to fill the world with these beautiful things. The other thing I really learned about myself from the writing part is so there's an essay at the back where I talk about why I wanted to write about this topic. I outline a lot of frankly just bad shit that I had to go through growing up.
You're very frank and honest about that.
Yes, and I thought that was important. Like, I wanted to add some legitimacy to this story, or to this book rather. There's a saying in comedy, stand-up comedians, that there's a certain type of person who becomes a stand-up comedian. It's somebody who's had a hard life because they can talk about things that the average person can't, because maybe they haven't experienced it, but also because you've just got to be a little bit screwed up to talk about these things. And I think that the things that I've gone through in my life, which are outlined in detail in that essay, in some way, and not a detrimental way, but did screw me up. And there was a lot of growing and healing and things I needed to fix about myself. And when it came to writing this book, I was 28 when I started writing it. I'm 30 now. I had dealt with most of that, and I did a lot of therapy when I was in high school. I think that I'm probably a little bit more emotionally mature than people who are my age, just by virtue of these experiences. But as I was writing, like, things came back that I didn't expect, things that I thought I had dealt with, and I was thinking about them in new ways. That story, Prayer, is, I would say, semi-autobiographical, but that's probably not even strong enough word. It's 99% autobiographical. That's straight out of my life, just with a few details changed. And stuff like that has writing that made me reflect on things in a way that I couldn't when I was younger and didn't. And I just sort of opened up old wounds, but rehealed them in a better way. It's sort of like getting a bone reset, I guess. If you break your arm and it heals the wrong way, but then you break it again and you reset it so that way it's properly fixed. So it was very much cathartic for me, and I think all writing is. Like, every time I write, it's to deal with some kind of trauma that I've been through or have experienced via other people in my life, and I think that's why I continue to write, because I want to deal with these things, but also because I want to put it out there for other people to see. Just the point of grief is for people to see that you can have problems and you can get better. And that's been my experience. So I wanted it to be an honest reflection for what I was going through. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, we have a few people in the chat. I'm just wondering. I know they've been listening to what you've had to say. I'm just gonna, while you and I continue to talk, I'm going to encourage the chat to give me some questions. If anybody has questions for Frank, now is a good time to ask them. I'm not going to take it as a bad sign if you don't, because I feel like we've covered a lot. We probably answered a lot of questions for anybody that has been watching. So, is there anything we haven't covered that I feel like we covered a lot, but I want to make sure we do a complete interview. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you felt important to get out there about grief or about the writing process, or how jealous I am of you are living in San Francisco?
Well, we definitely covered that. But I think we've been pretty thorough. And a lot of these questions are questions I've had to answer before in the last year. And I feel like I've sort of checked off all the boxes of the familiar questions. One thing that people don't really talk about or ask me about with regard to the writing process is how to be successful, which is sort of a broad question, but I think there are really two things, and I think you said that some part of the audience is aspiring creators, so I thought this might be important. The first thing you have to have is just what's the word for it? Yeah, you just got to do the work. Sit down and do it and finish things. I started with one 5-page story. As soon as I was done with the script, the same day I hired an artist, Nanad, that was Embrace. Like a week later, I had the line art. I hired a colorist, Esther, and she colored it. And then I hired Sean to do the letters. And after about 2 weeks later, I had my first complete comic. And it was sort of a snowball effect from there. I wrote in 6 months, I wrote 9 more stories, and those 10 stories together became Grief. Between those 6 months and those stories, I wrote a couple other things. I regularly write 1-page comics to really keep myself sharp. You know, if you can tell a story in 5 pages or 1 page even, like you can tell a story in 100 pages a lot more easily. So it's the little exercises, but it's always the doing. Keep doing. I wake up at 5:30 or 6 every morning, and I read for an hour, I write for an hour, and I do comics business stuff for an hour before like business hours start every day. So I try to write at least 1 page a day, if not 5. And I know that some people can't balance that or don't have the confidence or aren't there yet. But just start things and finish them. That's how you build momentum. And the other thing you can really do to help yourself, and honestly, this is just advice for life, is surround yourself with people who support you. My girlfriend is my biggest fan. She thinks my stuff's a lot better than it is. She's also a comic book fan. She also obviously loves me. But having somebody who is okay with me going away for a weekend, 3 weekends in a row, or working back-to-back cons and being gone for the week in between them is super key. Like, you know, you don't want to sacrifice your dreams for your relationship. You don't want to sacrifice your relationship for your dreams. So if you can surround yourself with people who are at least supportive of what you're doing, if not invested in what you're doing, that's awesome. Landing at Source Point was huge for me because I have a group of other creators and comics professionals who are invested in me being successful, and I'm invested in them being successful. And it doesn't even have to be comics related. Like we met through the Omnibus Collectors group, and another Source Point guy, Ben Goldsmith, is in there too. And it's just, you know, I've been able to sell some like 60 more copies of the book. Not that the Omnibus Collectors group is a cash cow or anything, but it was another community I was able to reach out to and say, hey, I've got this cool thing. Would any of you be interested in seeing it? And I'd say that's where the biggest showing of love has come from. Like I take screenshots every time somebody writes a review. I've got almost 20, like, you know, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, you know, review screenshots now. And, you know, that's super helpful for me with the marketing stuff, but it's also just really nice to know that, you know, there are people out there who care about this. And if you don't have people around you to support you and tell you that, you'll never know.
Speaking of support, I just remembered that you are going to be featured in the book is going to be featured in previews.
That is correct.
And there's a way for people to get your comic through their local comic shop now.
That is correct. You can take the pre-order code and you can go into your local comic shop and say, I want this book, and your shop can order it for you. It's just like ordering any other book from Marvel or Image or whatever publisher you like. And off the top of my head, I do not have the previews code. Actually, no, I can look it up real quick.
Is it, do you know when it will appear in previews?
It's in previews as of the catalog came out on May 30th for June, and it's in there now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's the order code is S as in Sam, T as in Timothy, L as in Lewis, 088452.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat. So STL
088452
is the previews code. Oops, I ran that all together. To order at your LCS.
Yep. And if anyone is that interested, you can order advanced copies directly from me between now and August 29th when the book comes out in shops. I started with about 300 copies. I'm down to my last 50.
Nice.
It's been really good. And I've sort of been buying up leftover stock from SourcePoint, from shows they've been going to that I haven't been at, where they don't want to ship things back to Michigan and Chicago where they have their warehouse. So I've sort of been replenishing. So it's probably more copies than I just said, but I don't have an official number. But yeah, if anyone wants to get a jump on it and get the book before it comes out, I have advanced copies, and they're on my website, frankgogol.com, in the web store.
Let me type in frankgogol.com. And how did I get this? I must have been Kickstarter, right?
No, I think you grabbed it from the omnibus.
Oh, okay.
I post in there a couple times a week, and every once in a while I throw in a post, saying, "Hey, here's the book, here's a new review," or somebody else will post about it, and that usually generates 1 or 2 sales, which is really nice.
Okay, I thought I did the Kickstarter.
You did, but that was just for the digital copy.
Oh, okay, that's right. Here I have your signature on it. That was a nice touch.
Yep, and I can tell you that's from the second batch, because that's the only one I used gold marker on, or bronze marker, whatever it was. I use silver normally, but I had run out of silver. So you were
okay.
I can tell you exactly which post you ordered from.
There was a good question in here about a contract. Do you sign contracts you make, or is there something from comics experience that serves as a model contract for a professional relationship?
It's I've been in a few contracts. I have a contract right now with Sonia Kinsey, who's doing the art for After the Storm. I had one with Beth Varney, who did the art for The World in Grief. But generally, I haven't had to do contracts. For one thing, with a 5-page story or a 10-page story, something for an anthology or something that, like, one of the chapters in Grief. There's almost no chance you're going to be able to do much with that to make money. So there's no need to have a contract with regards to revenue split or whatever. The reason I had a contract with Beth for our 5-page story was because she had been burned on writers who didn't pay her before. So she was upfront about that. And she said, "Look, I know this isn't a big commitment. I trust you, you trust me, but I would feel more comfortable." And anytime anyone's asked me for a contract, I've said, sure, absolutely. I've even drafted up the contract and made the amendments that they needed when necessary. But for the most part, I don't anymore work with people I don't know. or haven't worked with before. If I do want to work with somebody on something longer, I sort of build a bridge by doing something smaller with them first. So I don't have a ton of experience with contracts. I personally have a sort of stock contract that I use that I'd be happy to share with anyone. And I can give you, notes or details on how to get in touch with me when we're done here, and you can pass them along. But and you could write up a contract. It doesn't have to be very complex. It's name, date, writer hereby agrees to pay X number of dollars. Artist agrees to deliver X number of pages at a page rate. You both date and sign it, and that's that. You scan it, sign it, scan it, sign it, and then everyone has a PDF copy, and that's all there is to it. It really is a very small safety net, especially when you're working on shorter stuff like I was when I first started. So I mean, I think the big fear when you're working is that the other person won't do their side. For artists, is that the writer won't pay, and for writers, it's that the artist won't do their best work or won't deliver the work. I've had my experiences where I've had to herd cats and chase an artist around for a while to finish stuff, but eventually we were able to work it out. I will say, and this is a huge piece of advice, no matter who you are on which side of it, if somebody has a sob story or what sounds like a sob story about like a sick parent or something going on in their life, and that's why they can't pay or why they can't deliver the art right away, you never ever accuse that person of being a liar. You do not want to be on the wrong side of that argument. You don't want to be that asshole. Patience is really important. I mean, eventually you can tell. Like if it's been a year and you're working on a 5-page story and they've delivered 1 page, it's probably something more than that, or that person's just, not going to be doing it. And, it's a crapshoot. I have not had a bad experience. I've had to chase one artist around a little bit, and he really did have legitimate stuff going on in the background in his life that took up a lot of his time. And, I was patient. It took about 6 months, and I finished a bunch of other stuff in the meantime. And you just work through it. But yeah, like I said, if anyone wants to see my contract template, I'm happy to pass it along. If you have show notes for this, I can create a download link and we can add it later.
Okay. I mean, I can put it in the chat. Show notes implies that I'm somewhat organized, and I am not. But actually, I could put that in the description box of this. I'll put your internet address and in the description box, and I can also put the previews code, and I can put the web address or whatever it's going to be for the contract template.
I'll throw the blank one in Dropbox and give you a link. Okay.
Yeah, Ryan Barrett. I'll put the contract template in the description for this when I get it from Frank, and you'll be able to go find it there. And just to follow up an earlier question from Ryan, we did discuss probably in the first third of this conversation, I would guess, how Frank did find all his artists, and it was a very interesting discussion. So that's where we talked about where and how he found his artists. Okay, then you can be reached at frankgogol.com. How else can they get a hold of you?
frankgogol.com. I'm on every relevant source of social media. Twitter, which I hate, but is sort of it's a cesspool, and it's just yelling into the void, but it seems to be the primary comics community social media. So I'm on there at Frank Gogol, FrankGogol, one word. I'm on Instagram, which is my favorite. That's a mix of my comic stuff and just stuff I like to take pictures of. I love photography. So I'm on there at Frank Gogol as well. I'm on Facebook. I'm not hiding or anything. You can add me as a regular old friend on there. You don't have to like my Facebook page. I have one of those. I don't use it very much because Facebook doesn't really help with those. But yeah, I'm accessible. But there's a contact box on my website that goes to a separate email account I have for stuff like that. If anyone wants to reach out to me directly without going through social media, I know not everybody has it. If you want to be a comics creator, you better get it because you're not going to be able to build a brand without it. But that's a conversation for another day.
Awesome. This has been great, Frank. I really appreciate your taking time. I wish you continued success. As I said, I've read this 3 or 4 times, and I get something out of it each time. Grief is the book by SourcePoint Press, and it is extremely readable, extremely emotional, and it's got some twists and turns in it that will keep you wanting to keep reading to the next short story. And as I said, not trying to be gatekeeper around here, but I recognize talent when I see it, and you've got talent, and I'm glad I got you before you get too big for little YouTube shows, because next time you're going to be on Good Morning America or something.
Oh, wow. I'd rather do the YouTube shows with you. I like one-on-one stuff. And talking about the book, it wasn't comfortable at first, but these days I feel a lot better about doing it. And if it can help other people make more comics, that's one of my big goals. I don't want to see comics go down the drain. So if I make 2 more of me someday.
Yeah, that is, we love comics, and that's, I love comics, and that's why I do this show. And this has been a good insight into the creation of a comic, which I haven't had on my channel, and I don't think a lot of people get to know, you know, start to finish, pen to paper, and then out to the LCS. A lot of people probably don't know what that's like, and I think this has been a really good informative session here, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody that tuned in, and I will let you go now, and I will let the chat go. So everybody, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it, and everybody, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit the like button, and if you want to leave comments, I always respond to comments. So this is OmniDog saying peace and love, peace and love. Thank you.